The recording is in progress, and we
Woo!
cannot leave the jungle until the dice reads 5 or 8. That is what the little weird black-green magnifying glass in the center of the board game has said. We are coming to you live from the 1995 classic board game Jumanji, and not the remake video game Jumanji with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Amy from Doctor Who, and Jack Black from
I was gonna say Jack Black.
yeah, Jack Black from all the Jack Black. I mean, he plays the same character. It's a great character, but it's really the same
Wasn't
character in every movie he plays.
wasn't Nick Jonas in there as well?
He was like a side character, but yes, Nick Jonas wasn't there. Much like in Scream Queens, Nick Jonas was there. I am John McDonald, American playwright. I'm here again this week with my lovely co-anchor, co-host, the Michelle Visage to my Santino Rice, Magnus and John.
Hello, everyone. You forgot to add in Colossal Pervert there as well, sir.
Oh, see, you were Colossal Deviant, so if you're Colossal Pervert, I don't know if that's a lateral move or if it's just getting worse as time goes on.
Let's go if it gets worse as time goes on, shall we?
I don't know. I mean, people love your dive-in series, and you're doing your giveaway right now, so I think that's super, super neat how people have responded to your work. So I maybe it's getting better with age. You're just getting more. You're like Ian McClellan. You're becoming a stately homo of England. You know, it's everything you want to be.
I shall become the wise elder gay of my country.
Oh God, I wish I could be a wise elder gay of any country. But here I stand in my mid-30s, somewhat wise, but not yet an elder gay. So today we are talking about the 1995 movie Jumanji, and this is one of my favorite Robin Williams movies, and one of the better Kirsten Dunst movies, in my opinion. I know she's super young; it's one of her first roles, but there's something about Jumanji and how Robin Williams, Kirsten Dunst, Bonnie Hunt, and I guess Bradley Pierce. I'm looking at the IMDb page, and I always think of the youngest Peter perpetually as like his young self, but the picture of Bradley Pierce on the IMDb is like current age, and it seems wrong somehow.
He's turned into a bit of a bear, from what I see.
Yeah, a bit of a bear in a good way. BEAR, sexy, overweight, gay bear, not bear as in bear with me. So.
Yes. So I admit this has to be one of my favorite childhood classics as well. I don't want to say too much about my age but I suppose we're going into elder gay territory there, actually, by touching on my age. But I was there when it first came out in 1995. And I remember watching it with my siblings in our living room and being really spellbound by this really imaginative fantasy. Oh, it was a very surreal for my young mind to watch it, to see all these animals jumping out of this place, that place, and other, and the entire house getting taken over by the jungle.
So this is 95.
Yes.
And I think it was actually one of the summer movies the same year as the Power Ranger movies and Batman Forever. Because I remember that after it came out, I had liked it so much that for Christmas I asked for the Jumanji board game. And then when it was like you put the cards under the red magnifying glass to find out what happens to you, I was sorely disappointed for some reason that no property damage and giant mosquitoes were flying out of a board game. But this movie, yeah. I felt like you were going to say something there.
I was going to say, oh, how offensive that didn't actually happen to you.
I mean, for me, I had actually, in elementary school, Jumanji the book, which it's based on. So it's based on a 1981 children's, not a chapter book, but like not just pictures, like somewhere like a primer. So it's very picture heavy.
It's interesting. It's, as you say, it's a picture book for children, but it has pages of text on it. It fully describes what's going on, not just visually what's happening. So as you're correct, it's certainly not something you'd give to a toddler just to browse through.
I mean, I would if I wanted to terrify them, but I'm an awful person. So it's 19. So this book comes out in 1981. They call it a fantasy children's picture book, and it's written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. And it stars Peter and Judy, who Kirsten Dunst and Bradley Pierce would be in the movie, but not as the main characters. The monkeys that we see in the movie that are in the kitchen are the cover of the book, which is, I think, why they're one of the first things to come out of the board game. Here's a fun fact, too. The follow-up, Zathura, released in 2002, would later become a movie, which is the first movie Josh Hutcherson was in, who would go on to become PETA in The Hunger Games. And so we have Jumanji, in a weird way, to be the reasoning we have Josh Hutcherson in say Hunger Games instead of like Ender's Game, maybe.
Yes, it was one that Josh was really quite the child actor back in his day. He did that Journey to the Center of the Earth thing as well. As you say, Bridge to Terabithia.
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 If you need a good cry, Bridge to Terabithia. Great book, good movie. You need a good cry. That's the way you go.
Now, it's interesting to mention. I'm gonna get this wrong as well. I am awful sometimes with names. Zufaria?
I've never actually heard it pronounced because I did not see the movie, and I don't know why, because I think I probably would have enjoyed it. I think it's Zathura.
Zathura.
I think it's a harsh A.
Now, you see, for long as I'd seen it when it came out, I didn't see the movie, but I saw about it and the trailers and such. And there was an awful lot of comparison to Jumanji. Now, the thing is that there was a lot of comparison, but no one ever, as far as I recall, no one ever said, oh, by the way, this is by the same author, and it's technically the sequel to Jumanji, because that's how he wrote it. So technically, this is the sequel movie to Jumanji. But the marketing over here didn't actually ever say that, as far as I'm aware.
I don't think the marketing ever did, and I don't know if it's because it had been so long since Jumanji had happened, because 95 to 2002 isn't long enough for all the kids that had seen it in 95 to necessarily have kids to market it to. So you can't really do the nostalgia thing necessarily. And Zathura as a space theme is so different from kind of the Perils of a Jungle. And Zathura as a film is really about older brother, younger brother dynamic, where here it's about found family, reclaiming identity. Jumanji, the film especially, is heavy in learning to tell your truth, which all the characters go through. Bonnie Hunt as Sarah Whittle does an amazing job as this like kind of very lost in the real world character where everyone else is lost in their fantasy and she's really lost in the real world that she inhabited. And Bonnie Hunt, who I always confuse with Jodie Foster for some reason, it's not Jodie Foster in this movie, it is Bonnie Hunt. And Laura Bell Bundy plays her younger character, which is really cool. So
I suppose a good thing to point out is what you pointed out earlier, that it was out in 1995, around the same time that you had the Power Rangers movie come out and other things. I think something interesting to point out is the fact that Jumanji came out and it really was a summer blockbuster in the period where you could kind of say everyone was looking forward to the summer blockbuster movies. It was sort of the height of that trend. Cinema, unfortunately, has transitioned quite differently nowadays. I think everyone listening will be quite aware of Disney's continuing dominance of the silver screen, which is good and bad. I enjoy the Marvel movies, but you have to admit that Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, it's got such a dominance that there's a lot of other films that do struggle to come out. So the silver screen is sort of dominated by that now. But back in that time, it was much more different studios bring out a variety of different properties. I mean, Jumanji was a standalone by itself, as is quite a few other things.
Yeah. And it's also too, if you want to do comparatively for summer blockbuster, if you
Mm,
compare the Batman and its nearly 3 hour runtime, probably more even with previews, which were a thing in the mid '90s. The
mm.
Jumanji was not 3 hours long, and it didn't feel 3 hours long either.
Uh,
Jumanji was it's a coming of age story, and if you're doing it as like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, it could feel like a railroady type thing where it feels like you're being
mm,
led, but it's also the style of the board game is you're being led down a path.
mm,
um, and so I really like the idea of the movie is about a path, and it's about characters that both go forwards and backwards. It's about the idea of consequences for if you
mm,
cheat, and it's about the idea of confrontation and fear. And uh, you see that in. So this is a really great preview for another. If we ever do another Robin Williams movie, if we ever do Hook,
mm,
um, in Hook, and this doesn't happen in Hook, the movie Robin Williams is in, but in Peter Pan, the stage play, Captain Hook is usually played by the Darling father, by um, by whoever is playing Mr. Darling also plays Captain Hook. It's intentionally double cast that way.
mm.
And so in this film, in Jumanji, Van Pelt, the evil hunter from the board game who's hunting Alan Parrish because he's the one that rolled the dice, which is a great line. Everything about Van Pelt in this movie is fabulous. In fact, it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this movie was because of the scene of Van Pelt in the gunshot. But Van Pelt also plays Sam Parrish. He's the young Alan Parrish's father, that he has a very kind of conflicted relationship with because of their viewpoints of masculinity. The beginning of the movie is set in 1969. So in 69, in kind of New England, America, there's a very weird, waspy, Mozart, macho-y kind of masculinity, but there's like one road to masculinity. And like the movie tries to set it up as it's going to teach Alan how to, stand up to his bullies, but really it's more about a coming of age story and how um, Alan's kind of softer masculinity does end up working for him in the end. He's much more nuanced, and it's not just about standing up to the bullies, though that does happen in a way. And he does get the girl, so it's a very traditional
Mm.
blockbuster ending in a lot of ways. But I don't mind that. It's like Hocus Pocus. It's a very traditional ending thing, but I don't mind it. And Jonathan Hyde, who is not Ralph Fiennes, who plays the character of Van Pelt and Sam Parrish, does an amazing job being a father who really loves his son but doesn't know how to talk about loving his son.
Mm.
Like his mode of caring is you got beat up, but you showed that you're capable of standing up for yourself. So now I'm going to send you off to the boarding school that made me a man. And that was his language of talking. Like, and it's presented not quite in this way where it's the ultimate evil of sending his son away, but it really does hurt Alan quite a bit. And it leads to everything that happens in the movie and the fallout of being sucked into the board game. And it's a fabulous, it's a blockbuster movie really done right because it has
Mm.
the action. I love that it's not CGI driven either, but it has the action, but also has that underscore of as they travel the game, as the town becomes enveloped in the chaos and madness, as poor BB Newirth has to deal with David Allen Greer, which I don't hate actually. Um, it's a really complex film. It's kind of its
Mm.
own tapestry of jungle culture as it is, and I could probably go on forever. So
No, you're completely right. That's why it was such an engaging film to watch as a young kid, and especially now when you can revisit it as an adult and see even more of the nuances
yeah,
within it. Um, what you were speaking about, the lack of communication, well, not the lack of structured communication between father and son, the inability to connect. That leads quite nicely to something of the movie I've always liked. And actually, Jumanji's premise as a whole, well, at least what I remember of the movie and the animated TV series, which we'll touch on in a bit, is the ability of second chances. And the game, in a roundabout way, giving people second chances. It doesn't. Jumanji is an interesting creature. It's always been hinted that the game has a level of sentience in its actions.
And they never
Or I
say,
never
which I really
thought-
like. So if the people that make Jumanji are watching, please never
Yes.
clarify if it's sentient or not. Please leave that dubious. Never let me know if there's
Yes.
like some dude in the middle of the universe deciding against Jumanji.
Well-
I don't want to know. Leave it blank. Leave the mystery alive.
The mystery it is all the more intriguing because of the unknown answers. And I mean that links in fully to the fact that we don't really know what Jumanji is. We know it's a board game, but that's the level that we know about it. We don't know where it came from. We don't know how it ended up, for example, in that pit that they found it in.
And then it ends up traveling on the sea, which is a great callback to the children's story, is that in the children's story, it ends up traveling on the sea. So throwing it in the river is a callback.
Yeah.
There's something really interesting I was thinking about. I want you to be able to make your point. Sorry, I have a lot of thoughts here.
God. Sorry, what was your point?
There's something I was thinking about really interestingly about this, where the idea of second chances and the idea of travel, there's a really great kind of Pandora's box vibe to Jumanji, where you're going to open it and you're going to get all kinds of bad stuff. There's also a really great Persephone and Hades vibe to it. And so you see this also there's this great book slash TV series called Outlander. And I was thinking about this morning because I have friends that do mythology work, and they always talk about Outlander, where it perverts kind of the Persephone Hades mythology, and it makes the man into Jamie Fraser, the Scotsman. It turns him into kind of that Persephone style character where he has to go down into Hades 6 months out of the year, and he has to be led out. It's a very complex thing. I don't remember it exactly, but I like the idea of Alan Parrish had to find Jumanji at some point in order to grow, and you see this in the cartoon as well a little bit. The idea of this is kind of a meant to be a thing. It was meant for him to have to confront Ben Pelt, which is why the double casting works. There's a really kind of big mythology thing in here. You see it in the poster too. If you can get past the 1995 word arts kind of adventure for those who seek a way to find to leave their world behind thing, if you can get past the world art, the 1995 Microsoft word art of it all, it works really well. I think both as a fable, a fairy tale, a story, it works really well as a mythology all its own. And the house is exquisite too. The whole town is exquisite. It's a perfect little town.
So yes, the reason why I quite enjoyed it is, as you said, it was about. Sorry, I've lost track of where I was.
I said so many things in a very short space of time.
So yes, it was the thing with the second chances thing, and this relates to something else, which about the game, which I don't think is actually really thought about too much. The notion of time travel and alternative realities. Now, I think I better give some explanation to underscore this point. So as you've mentioned, John, the game says that once the game is finished, everything is reset. So once you complete the game, all the animals, all the damage and everything gets redone. But also, depending on who started playing it first, and the thing with the Jumanji, the film, I think it was an extreme example, considering what happened. But in the film,
it's such a great ending shot though, with Van Pelt like, I'm gonna shoot you and your girlfriend, quote unquote. And like when he drops the dice, and the character in the game who surely knows that he's got the dice in his hand, the whole ending scene, it's very Addams Family where they rescue Morticia. It's great. It's very great.
Yes. Sorry, I forgot where I was again.
Sorry, You were talking about the idea of time travel and going back in time.
Yeah. So um, as I was explaining that, so just to give some context, Alan and Sarah start playing the game. Alan rolled a 5 and gets sucked into the game, and Sarah freaks out because the bats. So she runs off screaming, but because she's freaked out, Alan's disappeared and doesn't understand what's happened. She then pretends he's run off. She doesn't tell everyone he's stuck in the game. Decades pass, and then these new kids come along and start playing the game, and it all resumes. Once the game is finished, it resets right back to the time when Alan and Sarah were originally playing it. So they revert back to children, but they still have their memories at the same time. And that allows them to influence the future for the better. It allows Alan as well the perspective from his experiences to be able to reach out to his father and reconnect properly. Um, and they tried to get rid of the bloody thing, but it doesn't actually work because Jumanji seems impervious to harm despite going in the water. But this is what I mean by second chances, that they're able to, him and Sarah are now able to have their memories, to make things for the better, because they get, at the beginning of the film, a chap loses his job because he looks out for Alan, but Alan owns up and takes responsibility. And at the same time, he's able to prevent the deaths of Peter and Judy's parents because he knowingly persuades the parents not to go on the ski trip, which ended up with them dying in the first place. So the whole thing of like, I don't know whether Jumanji is knowingly involved in these second chance things, whether the game itself was perhaps created as a transformational experience for those playing it, or if that's just literally something random as
I
part of the
think
game.
I think for me, the screenwriter probably wanted to do something very different from the book, because the
Mm,
book itself, and this is what I love about this, is that this is a version of adaptation where when it works, it really works, like X-Men 92. Shout
mm,
out to our podcast archives. Um, as an adaptation, it takes the Jumanji as kind of a cat in the hat story where it's just, a day and they're bored and they find this malevolent board game and all
mm,
chaos wreaks havoc. Um, into the story about second chances and a story about coming of age. It could have partially been Robin Williams was like, I want to do this, but I want it to be a serious role because I've done all this funny stuff. Um, it could have been someone saw Kirsten Dunst somewhere and was like, I need to cast her, but I need to give her something to do where she can both lie but be redeemable. Um, I like the idea as a blockbuster. It was made, so it was made for an age group, but it wasn't dumbed down. It's
mm,
not it's not like a Marvel movie where everything is CGI. The great thing about this is that there are behind the scenes of the evil flowers, the one that kills Judy essentially with poison, and the one that almost eats Peter. They're both puppets. There's a real sound stage when they have the monsoon in the house. That is a real sound stage that fills with water, and the crocodile's not real, but the water's definitely real. And so I like that there's a level of um, almost a Frank Oz Little Shop of Horrors um, to this film. There's a realism you don't get with CGI, where everybody's in a green room looking like
ah,
everything at tennis balls. So I,
so
I really like that.
some realism within the surrealism.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's what you need.
It's
Uh,
not
yeah.
wordplay there.
What's interesting too is that in the picture book, Jumanji doesn't go far. Peter and Judy bury Jumanji when they're done with it, and then their next door neighbors who never finish a board game pick it up. So it's actually much more malevolent in the book than it is in this film, where it's allowed to go down the river to whatever next destination it is. And the board game itself in the movie looks great. It looks like one of those really old school chess sets that are kind of lacquered and they're meant for long term thing. I don't know if the pieces are meant to look like they're made out of marble or ivory or whatnot. Um, but there's something very solid about the Jumanji board game that is really great. I don't know that I'd want a board game where it made the sound of drums when it wants you to play, because I feel like that would be very distracting. But as a convention for getting the kids to find the board game in the fourth story attic of this gigantic mansion that they've moved into with their one surviving aunt, which shout out to the economy of 1995 for that affordability. It's really there's really great the scene of Alan coming in and then changing, transitioning into more modern clothes, coming in from the jungle. It's really cool, and it's a moment of lightheartedness, but it's not so comedy that it becomes a comedy after that. It's still very much an action adventure. I don't remember if they build it as a comedy, but when I think about Jumanji, I don't think it as a comedy film as much as I think about it the adventure more than the humor, except for
I
David
think
Allen Greer.
I think it was billed as more of a children's fantasy adventure film rather than a comedy. But of course, um, there, as you said, there's plenty of comedy, especially with Robin Williams leading the cast,
Yeah,
who
yeah,
such a talent for both dramatic roles, but also for comedic roles as well. He would he was so great at being able to
yeah.
move between the two with an ease. God rest his soul.
Well, there was even a great dark like when he did things like Death to Smoochie and 1 Hour Photo where he went really dark. You can look at
Mm,
those versus this movie and Patch Adams, What Dreams May Come, um, Good Morning Vietnam. You can look at those films and you can say he has a lot of charisma and energy. And here it could have read really badly because essentially he's playing an adolescent in an adult body. So it could have gone really creepy. It could have gone total Tom Hanks and big. But there's something about Alan that was already incredibly intuitive and bright when he was younger. And Robin Williams carries that through to an adulthood film. There's a great narrative about survival in this film that isn't
mm,
about surviving a jungle. Because there's a coming of age story, but there's also the idea of coming of age of surviving, the idea that Peter and Judy lie to survive, and it becomes such a
mm,
survival mechanism they can't even tell the truth to their aunt, who they have no reason to really lie to.
no.
And Alan not just surviving the desert, but uh, the idea of how he tells the truth, the idea of how the children
Mm,
open up to him, the idea of how Sarah has learned to lie badly about her life, and she's like a
yeah.
Madame Zolta, some kind of like sad in-town mystic who doesn't have any friends. And Sam is just like, no, here I am. Here's the truth. Why didn't you do anything? Um, and then you have the great scene with the stampede in the library, which is really
Mm.
cool.
There's a great underlying theme about people being able to confront their trauma within the film. I know that's a very heavy subject matter for a children's fantasy, but it really is. Alan facing the trauma of realizing he's been missing for so many years, that his parents are gone. Um,
Yeah, and his dad was,
Sarah,
people had thought his dad
yeah.
had murdered him too. Like,
Mm,
they don't really touch on what happened to the dad, but you can't
mm.
help the underlying question of what happened to the dad when people thought he'd murdered his son, essentially.
Or at the very least, the fact that he drove to a lot of people that if they didn't think he was dead, they would have thought he'd run away. And back then, it would have been so much more like it's still terrible when children run away from home now. But thinking back then, when it, you know, family shame was a much more bigger thing for the community, they would have had to live with that constant regret and all the side eye and such from people in the community, let alone the fact that his father's factory, which was the seemingly the only economic powerhouse in the town, went under, and then
Oh yeah.
everyone lost their jobs. And so let's see, we've been dealing with suspicion of murder, economic downturns, people confronting their trauma, man-eating animals, and what have you.
This
This
is not
movie's a lot heavier than you think.
this movie's not a movie for sissies. This movie does some really great work in the spirit, but there's also for all the seriousness, there is the lighthearted tone of they're being chased by animals from a demonic board game. So like it is about adventure, but how you interpret the word adventure, an adventure for those who seek to find a way to leave their world behind. It's lighthearted, but it's also cautionary. Um, you can tell in the first 10 minutes because the very long scene in the trailer they essentially live in with young Alan getting sucked into the board game and looking like it's very painful to do, and having poor Bonnie Hunt having to fight off these giant demonic spiders with Alan stuck in the floorboard. Like it's harrowing and it's frightening, you know, but there's also moments of togetherness. It's very much like childhood and how you would, it's almost like a child trying to describe what would happen if the things in the board game were to come to life. um, and because children tend to go over the top with descriptions, you know, then you can really see the idea of an elephant stampeding over a car. It makes a lot of sense in a way as both a story told to children and a story told by children.
I mean, you could really see Jumanji as an allegory for a childhood adventure. If you think about over the top adventures, friends being together, going on these adventures and such, it gets really messed up sometimes because of the fact that
Yeah.
kids are just playing games. They don't realize like how dark they can make things without
Well,
thinking about
well,
it.
like other movies that IMDb recommends if you like Jumanji, so you've got like Home
Of
Alone
course.
2, Hook, Zathura,
Hmm.
some sort of Jumanji sequel that's not a reboot, that I cannot even tell what year this is from, and like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So there's a certain type of children's adventure that works here. Okay. Oh, this is a weird prequel movie. What is this? What am I looking at? What year is this from?
I take it was an unofficial prequel.
No, this is official. It takes place in
What?
1869 before the events of the original movie.
What?
And this talks about the birth of Jumanji in Sierra Leone, but it will not tell me. Wait, so it came out in 2021, but it came out after Jumanji: The Next Level. So it's a prequel to the 1995 movie that came out after the movie with The Rock. And that is wild. I don't have any desire to see it. It looks awful, but it
I'm
exists if anybody wants to see it.
I am actually very intrigued, so I think I might have to go away and read about this myself. But as you say, I'm not really fussed about learning about the origins of Jumanji because the board game itself, it I was going to say it's fun, but it's not really fun. um,
Yeah.
you don't need to figure out exactly where it is because Jumanji just is, and I think that's the thing. Like Jumanji comes across as not amoral, but it doesn't subscribe to human morality. It operates by its own rules. It is the game is the game as it is,
Yeah.
and people that play it by their own choice, and they just have to deal with the rules and the consequences. And on the flip side, Jumanji off says, if you complete me, I will reset for everything.
Yeah.
So there is like a, and that's why I was meaning before that I felt it linked in with second chances because after you completed the game, it allows you to keep all your knowledge of what's happened.
Unless
And
you're Kirsten Dunst and Bradley Pierce, because they are not even born at that point in '69. But then they're the starters of the animated series, so they're probably
yeah.
fine.
So the animated series, I watched that as a kid, and I revisited it
Yeah.
a little bit as an adult. Now that's quite interesting because, oh, just to quickly touch on before I forget, you were going on before about the screenwriter for the Jumanji movie. What I found out was the writer of the book, Chris Van Allsburg, he actually had creative input into the adaptation of um, his picture book into the movie. So he helped to create the script for it. And he said that his point was he wanted to keep it mysterious and to make sure that surrealism was very much present within the film.
That's
Um,
great.
so he actually kept that on there. I don't know if he had anything to do with the follow-up Zafira or anything. Oh, and just before I forget and go on to the animated series, an interesting fact that some people might not be aware of, he's written loads of picture books in different veins. One of them was The Polar Express, and he also helped to adapt that into a film as well.
Oh, what a nightmare film, though. That's all down to technology. It's a great movie, but what a nightmare visual of a. When we do Christmas stuff again, assuming we can actually stay on topic, one of my friends that loves Halloween, that's her favorite Christmas movie. And I kind of like it I kind of like it. I like to watch it IMAX and really just get the embracing of the nightmare right up in my face.
Mm,
But as a book, it's a beautiful book. There's something about Chris Van Allberg's work that has nostalgia to it, but it doesn't
mm,
submerge and tarry in that nostalgia so much that you can't like move on and live in the present.
mm,
Um, which is not something you necessarily get from the TV series. The animated TV series is a little bit of a product of its time. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but when I'm looking at the animation style, it very much is in the vein of kind of the Nicktoons of the time. It has a very
mm.
Wild Thornberries, Opera
Yes.
Monsters vibe to it. And if you're looking for queer casting in this, Tim Curry has in 18 episodes of the Jumanji animated series. So Tim Curry and Billy West, Billy West, of course, who played Fry in Futurama, they're both heavily represented in the animated show, as is Ashley Johnson from Critical Role. Ashley Johnson plays, who does she play? Peter Shepard. So she plays the boy. Who else does she play? It's not going to tell me who else she plays. Yeah, but if you're really desperately looking for the queer angle, quote unquote, of the things we talk about, I've got Tim Curry for you, and you don't get much gayer than Tim Curry.
Oh yes, he played the snarky merchant, didn't he?
He plays Trader Slick, which
Mm.
is an adult cinema name if I've ever heard an adult cinema name in my life.
Ah. Um, so just to quickly give a bit of background actually to the animated series, it's a little different to the movie. In the animated series, Peter plays the board game. And in this version of the game, the clues are very important, and you need to use the clues to help because the game pretty much keeps sucking people in constantly all the time. I think this is what happens in every episode of the series. That Judy and Peter, they're playing the game and they read a clue and they get sucked in
Yeah.
to the jungle to figure out what they need to do with their clue.
It's
Yeah.
very Dragon Tales. It's very much like we're grabbing the scale and here we are in the magical land that is out of time and space. It's very much that.
Mm. Um, so Alan accidentally doesn't read his clue and gets sucked in, and that's how he gets trapped. And Judy and Peter meet him, and a lot of the story to the animated series is them figuring out how to find out what his clue was. And going back to the time travel aspect I mentioned before, it gets very wibbly wobbly in the TV series
Yeah.
because from what I remember, Alan arrives in the jungle. He has no survival skills, but Peter and Judy, who are sent back in time after meeting Alan and being in for him for a while and learning survival skills from him, then teach him when he arrives how to survive in the jungle with the hints that they picked up. And then later on, a younger Alan meets Judy and Peter and gives them other information. So it all gets very convoluted with the timeline in this animated series. It's
And it went on for 3 seasons too. So it was popular enough to get 3 seasons, which where in the world is Carmen Sandiego didn't get. So
no. And what was probably quite rare, it actually had a conclusion actually
Yeah,
finished.
which is one of the top rated episodes of it. Season 3, episode 14. Shout out to Pi Day. The episode title is very subtle. It's called Goodbye Jumanji. It has a 7.1 rating out of 10 on IMDb, which is pretty high for most Drag Race episodes. And they stumble
Um,
across Peter, Judy, and Alan stumble across. By the way, Sarah Whittle does not appear in the show. She's the only main cast character that does not appear in the show. They stumble across something very subtle. It's called the Crystal of Reflection. So it's a very subtle episode, is what it is.
mm. uh, what I laugh at is the fact that the episode ends with them escaping, them getting Alan out of the jungle at last properly, and Judy and Peter resolve to go back the next day and destroy the game, like after they've had dinner and everything. And the episode ends with a close-in of Jumanji with the drums rolling from the board game. And I'm just thinking to myself, how the heck are you going to destroy a magical board game?
I mean, you said it in front of the TV, and it just kind of destroys itself. If I learned anything from Rocco's Modern Life, but it's the idea too. This goes back to the idea of this is where it really shows that it was made for kids. Is the idea of a kid's idea after these 3 seasons of things is that we can still destroy it, even though it obviously is like a TARDIS in its own pocket dimension. And so that's where it really starts to, you can really see where specifically the animated series uh, is very much more for kids, because at
Mm,
the end of the movie they they never really have a conversation about what they're going to do with it other than throw it in a river and like move it away. Like, it's not a matter of we can destroy this. There's not even that conversation. It's just we're going to put it in the water and we're going to send it on its way, and we're just going to hope that it goes super far and there's no droughts. And I'm just imagining like a fish trawling vessel finding Jumanji and like opening it and playing it and going full on like Kraken from Pirates of the Caribbean, just like engulfing their ship. Um,
well, I mean, if they destroyed the board game, what's to say that it wouldn't release the entire jungle over an unspecified area of
Maybe
the
that's what
local
happened
area?
the first time, you know? Maybe that's what happened in the beginning. No, it's one of the great things about Jumanji that works on all levels, that worked for Jumanji Next Level, because The Rock was very, very clear that it wasn't a reboot. So I guess it's supposed to be its own thing. Um, is kind of the idea of, you know, learning about yourself in the process. They don't do the body switch that they do in Jumanji the Next Level, and they don't do it in Jumanji 1995, but they don't need that. The characters in 95 have so much they need to learn about themselves without having to be in a different body. If you just look at the side characters, you look at kind of BB Newirth, who is a fantastic actress, playing this Aunt Nora character who's just desperately trying to connect with these children. And you've got
Mm,
David Allen Greer, who was the son of the guy that Allen got fired, I think, who plays the cop, who's still
yes.
pretty unresolved. He's kind of just floating in this town that he's watching devolve. What is it? There's a one-off joke he makes about, well, this shop used to be this, and now it's a KFC, but it could be whatever because the town is destroying itself. But like David Allen Greer, who I love, and we kind of lost to the end of the '90s, I feel like, because I
Mm,
don't think I saw him much after in the 2000s. Like it, like it's such a small, subtle thing, but it speaks so much about the characters and about how much Alan being sucked into the game set off this domino effect, uh,
mm,
and that all these people that were touched by him have to learn things. I think it's actually really interesting that we don't see his bully, the person that bullied him essentially into the fight that opens the movie. We don't see the bully. We see the ramifications on Sarah. There's the homeless man that lives in the abandoned shoe factory that gives Alan his set of clothing. It's very representative, and it's this really great masculine moments. but it's just this idea that all these people don't have to swap out of bodies because they still need to learn who they are. Um, Peter and Judy are so young that they've developed this concept of lying, but except for finding out about their parents in a car crash, we never really find out kind of who they are, other than they are the kids. Because once Alan and Sarah are a big part of the movie, Peter and Judy don't go by the wayside; they're still very present. But the movie really does. The second Robin Williams comes on screen, it really does become a Robin Williams film. And I cannot. It's not bad. I'm not stressing that because it's bad. I'm just letting you know, if you're going to this movie for Kirsten Dunst, because that's why I watched Drop Dead Gorgeous. It's a good movie, but it's not a Kirsten Dunst movie. It's not Marie Antoinette. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it's very well balanced. I think for the age she is, it's a very appropriate character. I love that they don't. I love that she's in like the 1990s kids classic overall early Mary Kate and Ashley wear. I really appreciate that. But yeah, it's one of those things where the second Robin Williams is on screen, it's a Robin
Yeah.
Williams movie, and you just got to kind of accept that you're watching a Robin Williams film.
It happens. He was such a he was a very quietly charismatic man, and I don't think he really understood how much presence
Yeah.
he could have on the screen. But the moment you saw it, you would be like, oh, "It's Robert Williams," and you were just like captured by his presence
His
and such.
work with Edward Norton in Death to Smoochie. And Death to Smoochie is a very weird movie. It's a movie that shouldn't exist. It's a movie that doesn't make a whole ton of sense. But this kind of war between Robin Williams and Edward Norton in Death to Smoochie it's such a weird, interesting movie. And all the movies that Robin Williams did um, had this tinge of weird but interesting in concept, even Toys, which I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about, which was a movie starring him essentially. I think Bonnie Hunt does a lot of the work here in this movie to tamper Robin Williams' insanity a little bit, which is why I like Kate Winslet in The Holiday, because Jack Black on his own is too much for me, but give me Jack Black and Kate Winslet, it really works for me. Sarah Whittle does a lot of grounding work. Sarah Whittle in this movie, Bonnie Hunt is like, this is crazy, right? Like, I'm not taking crazy pills. This is a crazy scenario that we are in. I don't want to go to this house again. Please do not make me go to this house again. And she really is a grounding force, like, for all the people in the audience that are like, what are we even watching now? She's like, no, you're right. This is crazy. This should not be happening. There should not be a lion in this bedroom currently. Um, and it's just a great cast of four, but because it's Robin Williams, no matter what you do, Robin Williams is going to steal the scene, and it's not bad. It's why Family Guy did an episode where everybody turned into Robin Williams. You can't avoid it. It's fine. It's fine.
You mentioned about Judy and Peter again, and this is something actually that I thought about when I was revisiting the film before we had this discussion. I was looking up the cast again, and I saw a photo of Judy Peter, and for a split second, I thought, wait, that's the kids from Jurassic Park. And then I had the comparison, and there's a lot of similarities because it's that period.
Yeah, there was a formula.
Well.
You all kind of wanted them to look like the middle kid from Full House. You wanted the daughter to be just slightly tomboyish because it really wasn't in to be a girly girl at that time. That I remember. I could be completely wrong. Um,
Oh no.
there are some points in this movie for makeup for because I don't think Peter turning into a monkey was CGI'd either. I'm pretty sure that was like actual like makeup stage prosthetics. I don't think that was CGI'd. I could be wrong. But I think CGI was very sparse in this because CGI technology was not at a place where you could really get beyond an elephant. Like you had to stand way back for CGI to be realistic in 1995.
Yep. No, it would have the issue is it wouldn't have added anything. It would likely have detracted from the experience if they were trying to use too much CGI. I've looked back on some movies recently, and I cannot but whenever I watch these movies, I can't believe that was the state of CGI then, And now you look 2, 3 decades later, and the technology has come along so much.
But I have to tell you though, the
Hmm.
downside of that is losing things that have kind of this artistic merit to them, because puppetry is a
Oh,
really interesting. Like the Fraggle Rock as CGI doesn't work as well as Fraggle Rock with Muppets. I still think about the man-eating yellow plants from Jumanji. Like when someone's like fantasy plans that frighten you, one of my first thoughts is this thing with the tentacle that slithers on the floor and then all of a sudden opens its gaping bright yellow maw and then it's like going to inhale you and there's just nothing you can do about it if you're on your own. And that great scene of Robin Williams smashing the sword and then the scabbard goes flying because he doesn't know there's a scabbard on it. It's a great scene all the way. Like the special effects aren't great, but they were used so well. Um, yeah, I'm a big fan of like old school puppets in movie. I think there's something to the merit and there's something to the realism of it.
To give an example of something that didn't, there's some great lower budget indie productions that don't really use CGI at all, but they come out across so well. To use examples, something that's completely on the other side of the spectrum. Look at Paranormal Activity. They set up with a camera. They use suspense and editing to create the atmosphere in the movie. Look at the Blair Witch Project to give further back down the line. They didn't use CGI. They just used, well, very good, again, very good editing and the use of hand cameras and things. They didn't need CGI to make a great experience.
And you don't.
And so,
There's something to be
yeah.
said for learning special effects makeup in order to do the work, building special effects. You know?
Ooh, that actually leads into a good point I wanted to raise, actually.
Oh.
Something I mentioned to you before in our conversations. So I think part of the peril that affects us at Jumanji is how it represents the taking over of spaces. Like, as you said, the entire mansion became a jungle, basically. Suddenly, something that was safe and homely before is now filled with unknown perils. And you've got monkeys, lions, what have you, bursting out of the cupboards, for God's sakes, bursting out of the closets, you could almost say as well. But this touches on like a really interesting creepypasta that's come out recently. Have you heard of the Backrooms by chance?
I have not. I would have to look them up. I'm an old person, so I don't always hear about the creepy pastas and the memes. I get them later.
Um, to give a quick overview, the Backrooms is a creepypasta about an extra dimensional space that people can accidentally no clip or slide into. And when they end up there, it appears as empty office space or something that looks like empty office space. There's no furniture, there's just yellowing walls, old carpet, and just miles upon miles of empty rooms to walk through. Now, I can't help but when we were just looking to discuss Jumanji, I couldn't help but start to compare the two because of the sense of Jumanji takes over space and transforms it during the game into something, but it's almost like it's filling the space with its own essence. Whereas the Backrooms is the void of anything familiar, but they're still both deadly in their own rights. And sorry, is this something that really struck me recently when I was looking at the two?
I love that. That's great. It's really interesting. It's one of those things where when you start unraveling the layers of it, it goes from being just fun into this. You could really take it into a Hellraiser space where it could be this jungle really is out to get you. And I'm really glad they didn't do that in '95 But if they wanted to make a non-friendly reboot, you could really turn this terrifying quickly. Um, there's also something inherently very campy about it. So you could turn this into something that is, closer to like a Repo the Genetic Opera. You could turn it into a really kind of weird, high fantasy operatic event if you wanted to. When you think about camp, a lot of people when they think about camp for queerness, especially,
Mm,
you think about things like Divine, you think about Hairspray, but the idea of camp is really just an examination of what makes a thing normalized or a thing other to an extreme. So
mm.
the idea of Jumanji as camp, the idea of using a board game for boredom, but taking it to an extreme where you're definitely no longer bored, uh, really works in this case. The idea of um, having to renormalize yourself to society after being in the jungle for years. Um, the idea that Alan Parrish's first words to any person, besides screaming for his parents, is looking at a toilet and going, "Thank God, no more banana leaves." I mean, that's kids' humor, but it's also very camp in a way,
Mm,
and it works
yeah.
on so many different levels. The idea that a lion is just chilling on Aunt Nora's bed, which is the bed that belonged to his parents, because all of his stuff is still in the room, in the space.
Mm.
Um, I still can't believe they bought the house in '95. Like, I'm trying not to be angry about it. Like, maybe they inherited it. I don't actually remember, but I'm trying not to be angry about just how great
It,
that house is. Like,
it's from
I really feel it when it gets torn apart. It's a great house. It's almost like the house from Adam's Family Values that Debbie Jelinski moves Bester into. Um,
mm.
which leads
it,
me to
it, it
say Debbie Pastels, which is a great line from any movie.
oh, it's from that period of American filmmaking when any like settled families seem to have like a massive house themselves. Look at Kevin's family from Home Alone, like how
Yeah.
massive they were. And I've seen the question asked on Facebook before, how much money was his dad earning in order to afford
Well,
such a luxurious house?
when people ask that question, they fail to realize that's fiction. So the problem with
Mm,
when we do critical looking back at these pieces, you have to imagine some of this is about the fact that seem to have trouble in this day and age giving ourselves over to the idea of fiction into a world where it's not necessarily the real world. Um, and that's part of why gritty Batman for me doesn't do it for me as well as Batman Forever. Because if I'm going to a movie, I don't want to always get real world problems. I'm
mm,
okay with going into fantasy. So the idea that a town can be taken over from monkeys isn't a big deal for me because it's in the story and it works to the story. And I think we have to start training ourselves to be able to enjoy fiction in a way again.
mm,
And I think that that's something that is a struggle of how we let go, but how we don't necessarily unplug. It's kind of like the idea of that was actually the best point that I can make about this is the conversation in the opening of the newest Matrix movie, Matrix 4, where they're having the conversation, which is essentially, I think it's Lana Wachowski who was the main Wachowski on this, where it was the conversation that you can just hear Lana hearing in the writers' room of how do they make the movie more relatable, more bombastic, how do they please all the people. Um, but in '95, in this fantasy, we had a world where there was a club of babysitters in a town, that was what the book series was about. Like, it's one of those things where in the '90s, it wasn't so hard to let go and to give
mm,
yourself over to fiction. That's part of what makes the Animorph such a scary set of books, is that it had a tinge of reality to it, but
mm.
there was so much fantasy and mystery and intrigue, and you get that in Jumanji. And it's like, if I'm going to see End of Days where Arnold Schwarzenegger is battling the Antichrist, I'm not looking for a literal Antichrist. Like, I want someone that's going to go full on Eddie Redmayne and Jupiter Ascending. Like, I want stigmata. I want all of the craziness, I want all the religious imagery, but I don't necessarily want the reality of
Mm,
like we are in this church space and this church space is here and this is all the bad things church people have done. Like I can get that history from the iconography of the space.
mm,
I don't necessarily
yeah.
need I don't necessarily need the reality of things like in my face the whole time.
It's interesting because we live in a period where people are have been overwrought by everything that's happened. The financial crisis, then going into COVID,
The other
now
financial
current
crisis.
the other financial crisis, the current Ukrainian situation. You've got all of these very um, emotionally draining things happening. And you would think that people would want to engage in some escapism
Yeah.
again. But I wonder whether, if you have a look at what's changed since 1995, the sheer prevalence of the internet now in our lives, the ability for people to really endlessly watch as much films and television as they want. I wonder whether people have become so saturated by fantasy films, science fiction, all of this, that it becomes difficult for them to be able to sort of sit back and enjoy something that almost is a very I'm not going to say a simple premise, but it's a very straightforward premise. Board game creates jungle as you play it and causes situations and such. And I wonder whether the other issue is the fact that as soon as you have something that's popular, people want to know when is the sequel going to come out, when is more of the franchise
Yeah.
going to come out. It, uh, you
So
can't
here's
just. It's a. No, I'm
so
sorry.
here so here's two interesting examples to talk about that. And we're getting on to a little past an hour, so I don't want to like keep you
Ooh,
longer than you have. But here's two examples I'm thinking of where we can people watching this can come into our YouTube archive when this is on YouTube or leave us a message on the Instagram or the Twitter. But I can compare Jumanji to two other properties that are about similar values. So the first one I think of is the idea of Ready Player One, which is kind of this sci-fi, fantasy, other worlds going to a goal movie. But the problem with Ready Player One is it's not a movie of substance. It doesn't really have a point to what it's doing. It's just a reference to other things people enjoyed. It isn't really a coming
yeah.
of age story. It
Viva
doesn't
la
really have a
revolution.
purpose. Yeah. It's like a revolution, but it's a revolution that doesn't mean anything. Because I think at the end of it, they're right back where they started or something of that nature. And it's very much like we just went all through this so we could tell you about the pop culture of the 1980s. So you've got that, where it's not like Stranger Things, where it has this really deep meaning, and even though it's a reference to something, it really matters. And then you have the nostalgia of a film like 1910, which is about World War One, which is a completely different war from any war that we really associate people with now. Fought in a different way with different kind of mythic heroes in an almost now fantastical land. And so the struggle is people being afraid to actually do nostalgia in a way where it's, you know, just nostalgic without either being over explained or over apologetic. It's why
Mm,
Family Guy makes fun of things in a way because it's showing how cool it is and how anti progressive, but also how much it knows. Like it's afraid of being fantasy and just letting Batman be Batman and have bat nipples.
mm,
Like it's George Clooney spending 20 years apologizing for costuming choices that he didn't make and how he played a Batman in a Batman movie that I actually find acceptable. And if people could let go of a need for such realism, yeah, maybe Mr. Freeze makes a whole bunch of jokes that are about freezing things and puns. But you know what? It's a real Batman movie, and there's a heart to it. There's the idea of Barbara Gordon coming in and being like, I'm going to rescue my uncle from you because Alfred is your servant, and that's weird, and he's really old. And the idea of finding out about the connection between Alfred and Batman. It's how we watch movies. It's how we watch films in 95. It's how we consume things now.
mm.
Um, I think Jumanji does a lot of really good work, and I think in '95 it may have been saved by the fact that it was such a blockbuster summer season that year.
Mm,
Because it may have been a Labor Day film, so it may have been like the end of summer going into fall. So it
mm,
was kind of billed as a family thing. That's another thing, and I'm going to rant about this. Another point is the idea of communally going somewhere like the movie theater or a movie rental place, and how streaming robs us of that
mm,
anticipation and that
mm,
communal work.
mm.
But that is another ramble for another time. It's going to make me sound super old, and I know that, and I'm at peace with it because I think it's really important to realize and talk about. But Jumanji's excellent. If you haven't seen '95 Jumanji, whether or not you like Robin Williams, Kirsten Dunst, Bonnie Hunt, go see it.
Well, go see it, or at the very least, rent out a copy, gather your friends and family around, and
Yeah,
enjoy a Sunday afternoon film.
get your VHS player out. You could have like you could do
Wow.
like a really like
Yes.
you could do a really cool thing where you do like a picnic thing where you do like a living room picnic and you sit around and you watch Jumanji while like eating on the floor. I really think if you
Oh,
have kids of an age where they can handle the scarier stuff in the film, it's still a really good kids movie. It's not it's something that the whole family can really do together, and it's aged well
mm,
enough that you could even do it with like older generations of people. I really do think it's something the whole family
mm,
could do together, and however you like you could do like a found family Jumanji movie night and go
mm,
like full on costume contest, put up a
yes.
sheet in the backyard and watch it that way. And I think it has a lot of value
Mm.
in that, even in just creating community.
I have a little point about otherness to make in a second, but I just want to quickly, um, before we wrap everything up for today, you mentioned about found family, and you do really get the sense of found family at the end of the film because Alan and Sarah remember and they're about to have their own child and such.
They have a
Even the
party. Oh, they have the biggest, cutest Christmas party ever with all the people from their company in their home. Oh, it's great.
yes, it, it- it's so great. Even though like they meet Judy and Peter for that first time, and that well, I think technically they're meeting the parents properly for the first time. You got this foreknowledge. You kind of got this foreknowledge of the fact that surely from here, Alan and Sarah are gonna keep an eye on Judy and Peter growing up, and they might not never ever tell them about Jumanji because I mean, how on earth do you say, "Hey, did you know in the alternative timeline you and we all played a board game and we were all these eight, at
You
this
were
age."
you were compulsive liars. You were turned into a monkey for cheating. It's a whole thing. It's
Yeah.
okay.
But you get the sense that they will look out for them
Yeah.
later on and maybe try and make their own relationships with them afresh. And that's a really
It's
touching.
yeah, because in the '90s, having a mentor was one of those things that we were really doing as communities, especially in America. The idea of the Big Brother program was kind of at its peak, and you saw it in like sitcoms referenced a lot. I like the idea of the mentorship, but I like the idea that they also just selflessly save the parents from going on the vacation. You
Mm,
know, there was a great moment in the movie right there when Robin Williams is like screaming no and stops the entire party, and then it's like no, but we just need you on. Really, really brushes it off, but it's like we care so much about Peter and Judy at that point that we're glad, too. Because even though
yes.
Robin Williams takes over the movie, Peter and Judy are very present. They are very much in danger throughout the course of the film. It's like the opposite of Sabrina, where nothing can kill you. It's where everything can now kill you every single time you roll those dice.
Mm. And the thing is that having gone through all of that, the having gone through all of these adventures and such, I feel that having all that knowledge then creates a certain otherness within the people that played that do remember because they are always going to remember their experiences with Jumanji. The memories might fade a bit, but being chased by lions through your living room is not something you totally ever
Yeah.
forget about. And the thing is, they're never going to see the world in the same light again. And they're always going to be aware that there is some magic and fantasy within the world. So I don't. This is where they're never going to completely. They could be a part of modern society. I mean, clearly, Alan changed so much for the better and pretty much saved the town from economic ruin and such by taking on the family business and became a better man for it. But clearly, he and Sarah were always still a little different from their peers then because of that knowledge and how it transformed them.
Yeah, and when you talk about otherness too, if we're talking about queerness especially, the
Mm,
idea of learning how to be kind, because we
mm,
don't really get a lot of how Sarah changes because she's now 16 again. And yes, we get the romance, but more importantly, Sarah knows what it's like now to be othered and completely alone in a society. Like she understands the idea of being shunned. The idea of no one coming to your 16th birthday party may not seem like a trivial thing, but in a small town in New England, having no one come to your birthday party at 16 years old is not great. Like it's a really bad thing that can mess with you a lot,
mm,
and you get a lot of that from Bonnie Hunt. And so there's the idea of a Sarah Whittle that maybe reaches out of kindness, a Sarah Whittle aware of bullying, so goes against it, a Sarah Whittle that is really involved in people's lives, and it could be a completely different Sarah um, from just the glimpses we get of her before they play the game, before the bats chase her out. And so when you're looking at the idea of otherness, the idea of a creation of self, the idea of transitioning from something where it's very navel gazing and inward gazing to how do I make things better in the community? Because they've also got the knowledge of the world outside of 69. So they've got this knowledge of the
mm,
Vietnam War, they've got the knowledge of, the Gulf War, they've got the knowledge of kind of styles and things that are going to change, especially Sarah does. You know, they've got the idea of the transitions that we're going to make in those 30 years essentially, between who they were and who they are. And so they probably were a little bit of an outcast on their own because they had all that knowledge, because the self-serious 18-year-old can go one of two really ways, really good or really bad. But it is one of those things where if you're really looking for queerness inside of the film in a really, really like deep coded meaningful way, just the idea of how Sarah and Alan change things, not just for themselves, but maybe for the whole community, is really very present. Even though it's not, even though it's not spoken, it's very present.
mm.
And that's a really good filmmaking technique for people that are like, I want to show instead of tell. Jumanji is a great way to be like, here we are showing things instead of actually telling them to you. Um, so if you're a filmmaker or a dungeon master that wants to look at how you really create that complexity in the story without saying every word, Jumanji 95 is a great way to go. There's no Tim Curry, but you get him in the animated series afterwards. So that doesn't hurt either.
Oh, and I mean, it doesn't that just sound like a D&D campaign? Behold, you enter a clearing. Tim Curry is standing waiting for you with his wares and things for you to
Actually, it's
buy.
it's Tim Curry like American Dad's Roger, where it's actually just every version of Tim Curry, but it's just Tim Curry in that costume from that version. There's like a Dr. Frank, but there's also him as Lancelot. There's him as
The guy from Clue.
the guy from Clue, Wadsworth Butler. There's him as a giant pipe organ from Beauty and the Beast, Enchanted Christmas. So there's just all the different versions
Oh,
of Tim Curry hanging out everywhere in the field.
or
You enter a field and there's just a field of Tim Currys.
to to borrow a Marvel term, or his variants.
Oh, his variant.
There.
Well, speaking of that, my current variant is asking for mac and cheese for lunch. So I think I'm going to go and make my current variant some food. And then I'm going to get back to my work at the what is it? Where do they work? Where does Owen Wilson and Loki work in the show? They work at like a they're like time cops. I don't know what it is.
Time Loki time cop.
Aren't they time cops? Because that's how I
Something
understood it from the trailer. They very much seemed like time cops. I've got to be honest.
some temporal paranormal paradox agency. I haven't watched
So
it
they're
yet.
time cops. They
Yeah,
try to.
basically.
That's what it is. Yeah.
It Yes. Let's wrap this up before we start making any more puns about that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Magnus, for joining me today for Jumanji. I see that we have rolled an 8, so we are not going to be stuck in this board game forever, which I'm grateful for because once again, I don't know how to make mac and cheese over an open fire. Um, so I'll see you. I'll see you next time in whatever we choose to discuss next. And we hope that if you're listening to this, you very much enjoyed today's ramblings.
Ta-da, everyone.
Ta-da, indeed.